Today, we're going to talk about distractions in prayer. Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher. So, to talk about distractions in prayer, the way I want to approach this is to start off, because there are various things people say about it, such as, is it sinful, for example, and but just more generally, is it, like how bad is it, and so on. Because obviously it's not ideal. Like your ideal when praying is not to be doing things other than praying. So, I want to start off with something that is obvious, where it's going to be a little bit obvious, and then sort of work from there. So, if you're praying, and somebody comes over and taps you on the shoulder, this is clearly not your fault. You are not morally to blame that somebody has come over and tapped you on the shoulder and requested your help. And so clearly there are distractions in prayer which are not morally culpable. And as a general rule, now that's just taking the obvious sort of exterior kind of thing, but there also interior distractions, which are very common. You start thinking about something, like you are talking to God, and then you start thinking about something. And this is where, incidentally, rote prayer can really help, because rote prayers that you have memorized, where you're saying the words that you have memorized, they really help you to focus on what you're doing and focus on the thing that you are saying. The thing that you are saying to God. So they have that benefit. But for extemporaneous prayer, now even with rote prayers, you can easily be saying words but kind of thinking of something else. And for extemporaneous prayer, it's very easy to, as you're thinking about things, to start focusing on the subject to the point where now you're just kind of thinking in kind of a normal sort of way. Now, one thing, and a very basic thing, is to accept that this happens quite frequently, and like any other kind of thing where you're not doing what you actually intend to do, well, the first step is often just like, okay, go back to doing the thing you intend to do, and you'll go on to, think about other things or whatever, and as soon as you realize that's what you're doing, go back again, and keep on doing this, and keep on doing this. It's never going to get rid of the problem, but it will. It will help to some degree, and in any event, well, okay, you were thinking about other things, so now go back to the thing you wanted to be doing. In the same way that, like, let's say you are cleaning dishes at the sink, and you put the dish down for a moment and go off to do something, like to answer the door, or you realize, oh shoot, I need to take something out of the oven, or you realize, like, you know what, I left a book someplace and I'm going to forget about it completely unless I go move it from there. Let me just go do that, dry my hands, run off, move the book. Well, okay, so get back to cleaning the dishes. And you know what will happen at the end of this? The dishes will be clean, which is, what you wanted to do. So one thing is just on the simple practical level to have a little bit of realism about the fact that an interrupted thing is still the thing. That if your prayers are interrupted, even if they're interrupted many times, you are still praying. So, like, don't lose sight of that. Like, don't have some, like, shimmering, shining, platonic ideal of what praying looks like. And if you don't hit exactly that, you've done nothing. It's not true. That's not how it works. Okay. So that's on the simple practical level. Like, it's, you prefer it doesn't happen, but, a lot of things you would prefer in this life to not happen do. So, just some basic strategies for dealing with it, like you would anything else, is a really good starting point so that you don't let yourself be defeated. Because if you give up, well, you will never succeed. Okay, so now to take it to sort of, to look at it in a different perspective, to take it to another level in a sense. It's interesting to look at. Well, okay, actually, before I get there, not quite so, sort of intermediate. So this is why I'm interrupting myself, because I don't quite want to go all the way there yet. One thing you can do, too, is distractions during prayer may well be a useful way of coming to realize what you should be praying about. So, like, if you were trying to pray about something and you find yourself constantly thinking about something else, well, one thing to do is to take this as, maybe that's actually what I should be praying about right now. Let me pray about that thing instead. And because remember, you can pray about literally anything, and in fact, you should pray about literally everything. So there's nothing that you should exclude from talking to God about. And so if this thing is a concern of yours, then by all means talk to God about it. Like, maybe this is what you should be doing instead. It's interesting, a thing that comes to mind here is when Jesus said that if you are on your way to making a sacrifice at the altar, leave your gifts, or presenting a gift on the altar, and you remember that your brother has something against you. Leave your gifts on the altar, go and be reconciled with your brother, and then come and make your gift. Now, this is really, really, really clearly a distraction from prayer. You are placing gifts upon the altar. Now, remember, an altar, of course, was a table for sacrifice. But it wasn't always animal sacrifice, but it was a table for sacrifice. So you're like in the middle of one of the more profound kinds of prayer there is, sacrificing things, that you pause what you are doing to go be reconciled to your brother. So it's clearly not that all distractions are necessarily bad. In fact, what's being pointed out there is that this is actually the thing that you're supposed to be doing at the moment. The work that God has given you to do is going and being reconciled to your brother. So, that's one point in the continuum, sort of multidimensional. So, this is, you don't want to draw too much from this, because this is, sort of one point given to illustrate principles, not a, simple direction that you follow mindlessly. But the point is that in this case, the distraction during prayer is you recall that your brother has something against you. This is a distraction during prayer, but it is showing you what your prayer should be. That the real prayer, the truly important sacrifice, is to go and be reconciled to your brother. That this is the gift, the highest gift to give to God at the moment, is to go and do the thing you should be doing right now. So in like manner, when you are distracted during prayer, if you keep on thinking about something at work, or you keep on thinking about something with a person, or whatever it is, heck, you're obsessing about a video game or what have you. Well, if you are having trouble praying because you keep on coming back to this thing, make your prayer about that instead of the other thing. Like, maybe that's, put that on hold for now, come back to it later, and do this thing, because maybe that's actually the thing God wants you to be doing right now. Okay, so that's sort of an intermediate level of this. Now, taking it a step further, because we have the injunction to pray always. And this is kind of an interesting thing, because it would be, of course, impossible to pray always if distractions during prayer were bad. Because then you wouldn't be doing things like eating or drinking, or, emptying your bladder, or anything else. You would be praying continuously and die in fairly, within a fairly short time. And this is not a command to suicide. And that points to the prayer. It points to that prayer is potentially, at least, more than just formal prayer. Now, again, not so much again, but just to be clear, I'm not knocking formal prayer. There's tremendous benefit to formal prayer. In fact, I'm pretty bad at extemporaneous prayer, and I rely very heavily on rote prayer myself in my own very inadequate prayer life. But it does point to how there is more than just formalized prayer, where the object of your attention is, in fact, just the praying. And I want to sort of talk about the nature of reality to show how this might work, or to point in the direction of how this can work. Because the nature of reality at the moment is that we are in a temporary world. Everything is changing. Nothing lasts forever. Nothing remains what it is forever. The very nature of change is that you become something different. Related in many cases, not always. People die, for example. But you even yourself are constantly changing. You can't dip your finger in the same river twice, because the water's flowed on and it's now a different river. And everything is changing. if you actually, pay attention, rivers change their course and change their volume, all sorts of things. Everything changes. Even the things that we tend to think of as permanent actually change far more than we realize or particularly would like. And in fact, we go wrong frequently by wanting things to not change because we look for eternity within our changeable world. So what is the purpose of this changeable world? Well, this gets to, why did God put us in the same world? Why are we in the same time and space as each other? God could, give to each of us everything, and we'd have absolutely no need of interacting with each other in any way. And yet he gives it to us to interact with each other. And moreover, he gives it to us to be dependent upon each other. You learn things by people telling you that you would not otherwise know. You get food by people doing labor, often, by people feeding you that would not happen, and so on. Children depend on their parents, etc. Well, what's happening is God is giving it to us to take part in his act of creation. When you tell somebody something, you become part of God's act of giving them that knowledge. When you give somebody food, you become part of God's act of feeding them. Because, we live and breathe and have our being in God. Everything we do is a gift from God. And so everything we do is a participation in the action of God. Insofar as we do good, that is to say, insofar as we create being, we are taking part in God's act of creation, becoming incorporated into God's love. So we become literally a part of God's love. When you do something good, when you create some sort of being, such as giving somebody knowledge, you are becoming part of God's gift of being to that person. So we are essentially, we're taking part in creation, but of course this of its nature, to do that, to be created and take part in creation, you need sequencing, you need change, you need things to come into being, but then to get out of the way for new things to happen. And so everything would come to nothing, and nihilism would be true were it not for eternity. We're essentially in the prologue to life. That this is where things are getting ready to actually be. And this is why we long for things to remain. This is why we long for things that will last, because we're longing for eternity. That's what we were actually made for, is for eternity, but not yet. We're not supposed to be in eternity yet. And this is, why, sin is looking for God within creation. I'm slightly oversimplifying, but not tremendously. And to some degree, this is the same thing as looking for the eternal among the temporary. It's not literally identical, but it's got a lot in common. There's very strong relationships and parallels there, and they often are the same thing. And so, within this temporary world, we are taking part in the making of it. We're becoming part of God's love by taking part in the making of all of these things. And that's why it's fine that all the things that we make pass away, that you clean something that's dirty a day later. And the reason why this is okay and the work is still worthwhile is because, yes, in the changeable world, these things have made way for more being to come into existence. But in eternity, all being throughout all of time is going to come fully into existence. That I think it's St. Augustine had the metaphor of, our life is shattered over many moments, and at the end of time, God will gather up the shattered fragments of our being and put them together into a whole. That's, eternity. So within this temporary world, everything that we do, insofar as it is good, is directed towards God. It is taking part in God's action of creation. And if you understand it correctly, all things you look at as things that God is creating for the sake of eternity, that you are getting the privilege of taking some part in creating. Some things more than others, some things trivially or slightly, some things fairly substantially. That in everything that you do, if you look at it as that action, if you look at this as taking part in God's act of giving being to being that he, often to being that he has already made, adding to its being, if you can remember that all things point to God, that all things live and breathe and have their being in God, speaking very loosely, because, inanimate things have their being in God as well. Obviously, they don't live and breathe. But a rock has its being in God just as much as a lamb or sheep or human being. Adult sheep. Anyway, So the point is that all things, if you understand them to be good that God has made, and you interact with them as good that God has made, and that your interactions are taking part in God's act of loving the thing, often in a multi-layered way, where you are loving the thing, also giving, some benefit to something else too. Like when you sculpt a rock into a sculpture, you are making the rock more beautiful, but then also you give this as a gift to somebody, and then you are giving them the gift of beauty and the seeing of the, of the creation that God has made, because beauty is seeing goodness, is perceiving goodness. So you're giving to them to be able to perceive this goodness. So you're helping them to see it that they would have had trouble seeing otherwise. And so, you're helping multiple things in the same action. The purposes of God are manifold. Manifold. They are very, very many things. One action will fill many purposes, and true for all actions and for all things and so on. So, to the degree that you can look in these things as what they are, as that, every action that you do becomes a communication with God. That when you clean a dish, when you understand, when you actually, regard the thing as this creature of God, and you're using these other creatures of water and soap and like a sponge, in my case, to clean the dish, or the dishwasher, because, do that too. But as you regard these things as creatures of God, where you are bringing the goodness of order to these things that will then, spread out to the goodness of others who will get to use this for the sake of eating, to incorporate food into their being, you are in this action praying, because you are communicating with God in that sense. Now, you're not using words to do it. You're using actions. You're using, the orientation of your being. You're not, specifically saying like, "Oh Lord, I for thee and all those who will eat this clean this plate, and am cleaning this plate for you." You're just doing it, but if the fundamental orientation of your being is for what this thing truly actually is, if you can call to mind what is real, the action itself becomes a prayer. There are different definitions of prayer. And I talked a lot about what prayer is and various kinds of prayer in my previous video on prayer, but which I'm kind of relying on. But if we just use like the lifting of the mind and the heart to God, well, if in your action of doing this thing you are regarding it as what it truly is, and regarding it as something whose beginning and end is God, that all things you are lifting your mind and heart to God in the action. Now, I've never read any of Saint Therese of Lisieux, any of her writings, The Little Flower. I've seen Bishop Barron talk about it, and I've seen other people talk about it, that idea of doing little things with great love. And I think that that is describing the same kind of thing. So I mentioned this because this might be a good, if this is interesting to you, that's a place to look at for seeing another perspective on the same thing. I suspect it likely to be the case. That, I've never read it, as I said. But to do little things with great love is to regard, to have the fundamental orientation of your being to these little things, what they actually are. That if you are sweeping a hallway, to sweep a hallway with great love is to regard the hallway and the broom and the dust and the people who will walk through it and so on, all as what they are. And to regard this as the thing that it truly is, the giving to you of taking part in the giving of being to them. And to do that is to make that sweeping of the hallway praying. It is to do a little thing with great love. It is to make your life a prayer. In his phenomenally excellent video on prayer, it's like 8 minutes long, Bishop Barron, I think it was still Bishop Barron at the time. It's like 7 years old now or something, but I think it was still when he was a bishop. Might be when he was just Father Barron. Anyway, but I recommend looking it up, by the way, multiple times throughout your life. He mentioned in that video on prayer that Kierkegaard said that the saint is somebody whose life is about one thing. And he mentioned that, praying is finding the center, where you're here and now being created by God, is Thomas Merton, I think. I mentioned that. And if you sort of put these two things together, unfortunately, I didn't like the way he phrased it. I mean, it makes sense, and I'm not criticizing His Eminence. The direction he went with it is, he said, you could say that the saint is a person who prays. But I would have been, I think it would have been better. I'd have liked it better anyway, had he phrased it as, the saint is a person whose life is a prayer. Because if you put them together, that's kind of what you get. And that also answers that question, how do you pray always? Well, to make your entire life a prayer. And ideally, truly, to make your entire life one unbroken prayer. At least your waking life. The nature of sleep is itself, it's funny, we all sleep for approximately a third of our lives, and we don't even begin to understand it. Whether at the spiritual level, the philosophical level, the scientific level. I remember hearing not long ago that scientists who study it, sleep scientists, their best explanation for why we sleep is because we get tired. We know some of the things that go on during sleep, obviously. There's been a bunch of studying of what do we do when we're asleep? And, we study that, and we have some ideas about what we do, both practical, philosophically, and scientifically, or all of those things. But we don't know much about it, and we really do not understand sleep at all. So so if we just set that aside for a moment, just talk about our waking hours, to make your waking hours sort of one continuous prayer, in all things that you do. And if you do this, then distractions are still part of that same prayer. That when you are doing one thing and something else comes up, this is not an interruption to your prayer, but simply a shift in your prayer, just as spoken prayer has many words. When you say, "Our Father who art in heaven," well, the Father, to get to the Father, you have to be done saying the hour. You have to put the hour aside in order to say Father. And in order to say who, you have to put Father aside. That each of these things in turn, through the spoken prayer, even if it is an unbroken prayer, it is changing the content of the prayer as you move through it in the specifics, but it is still one prayer because they are all directed towards the same thing. They are all part of a greater whole of which the constituent parts make up the total being. And in like manner, if you can pray always in the sense of regarding all things as what they truly are in their relation to God, and all of your interactions with all things is what it truly is, the gift of being incorporated into God's generous act of giving being, then there will be distractions in the sense of you'll be changing what you're doing, but they will not be distractions in the sense of you'll be ceasing to pray and doing something else, because they will be like the way that the words in a spoken prayer change. And, after one word comes a completely different word. And after that comes a completely different word. And after that comes a completely different word. And yet they're part of the same prayer. And if you can make your life up into a prayer, then there will not be such a thing as a distraction in the sense of you ceasing to pray. It's just as you change from one topic to one part of the prayer to another, you may stop talking and start cleaning. You may stop talking and start contemplating something. Because remember, contemplation is actually one of the things we're supposed to be doing. On the seventh day, throughout creation, God looked at it and saw that it was good and saw that it was very good. And on the seventh day, God rested. Now remember, rest is not like, oh boy, am I exhausted, but rather taking a break from the action into contemplation to behold it. And that's part of, the nature of why is there a day of rest, is that part of our action is within this world is supposed to be contemplation, that we're not supposed to be completely divorced from eternity, that in prayer we actually contemplate things and their relationship to eternity. We contemplate, not just the thing before us, but all things together, across time and across space and into eternity. And so we're not supposed to neglect eternity, but it's supposed to have its correct relationship to the other things in our life. And so, even if we stop from the prayer of some active action, such as sweeping a hallway, into just thinking about how beautiful a sunset is, or what we are going to do in a video game, or what have you, that as long as we regard all of these things properly as what they truly are, as long as we don't allow ourselves to forget what we're actually doing, then, as long as the fundamental disposition of our entire being is correct, then it will be one continuous unbroken prayer that simply changes subjects where the words change out to make room for other words, but it won't be a distraction in the sense of you stop praying. So I think I've said that like 2 or 3 times at this point. So hopefully I suspect I've gotten across the point already, but hopefully I've also gotten across sort of supporting details to make it make sense. It's kind of why I repeat myself occasionally, because I'm just trying to get at the same thing from a few different angles to sort of show its shape and how it makes sense, rather than like just one and stop there. Because unless you happen to be fortunate enough to like have all of the same context that I do, just one perspective may well not make the thing intelligible. Anyway, so I mean, the result on the flip side is that I do repeat myself sometimes, partially due to human fallibility. So I apologize for the repeating of myself. Anyway, so hopefully that helps on the subject of distractions in prayer and practical and short-term and long-term ways of dealing with it. And probably the biggest thing, the most important takeaway is however you stumble, however you fall short, just remember that, like, okay, but now it's time to try to do it right. Because as long as you're alive, it's time to try to do it right. Until next time, may you hit everything you aim at. If you like this video, then clicking the like button, according to YouTube, will make them more likely to recommend it to others. If you know anyone who might get something out of this video, then it would be kind to share it with them, or just share it on social media in general. And if you'd like to see future videos of mine, you can subscribe. And if you're not in the habit of checking your subscriptions page regularly, then I suggest clicking the notification bell and setting that to always, because otherwise subscribing to a channel basically just sort of like gives YouTube a hint that maybe it should consider recommending these videos to you, possibly at some point, if they think so. It's a funny world we live in. God bless.